Mark Chataway and Christopher Nial. We're here for Medical Life at the Vaccines World Congress Europe in Barcelona. And it's been a fascinating first day, hasn't it, Chris?
Yeah.
A session really stood out for both of us, though, and it was on the potential impact of vaccines in combating antimicrobial resistance. As I'm sure many of you know, antimicrobial resistance is one of the great challenges facing us over the next couple of decades, unless there's a breakthrough in fighting bacterial infections. The safe thing to do, the prudent thing to do, is to assume there won't be a breakthrough and to say, what can we do to conserve the antibiotics we have and the few new antibiotics coming along? What became clear today, Chris, I think, was that vaccines are the way to do that. What really stood out for you?
Well, I just want to mention that this was a report that WHO launched about 3 weeks ago, and it's something that Medical Life covered on the day that the report was launched. It was good to see it presented to us and then have a panel discussion afterwards where the panel are raising questions between themselves and the audience got a chance to ask too.
So, clearly we already had a lot of deaths from antimicrobial resistance. But the thing that shocked me is that 100,000 of those deaths could have been averted if we just used the vaccines we have correctly.
Yep.
So those are not deaths from the infections the vaccines prevent. They're mostly deaths caused by secondary infections that antibiotics now fail to treat.
Yep.
It's a horrifying statistic that we do such a bad job of using the vaccines we have. And what did you think about? I was really struck also by the potential impact of vaccines in the near-term pipeline, things that aren't far away.
Yeah, so we've got in our arsenal, we've got the existing vaccines, and then there's late-stage development vaccines, which were also included in the report, and early clinical development vaccines. So that arsenal that we've got and is coming in the short term really could make a significant impact.
I mean, when you say significant, another 500,000 deaths a year could be prevented, right? And they could prevent 2.5 billion daily antibiotic doses, right?
That's right. Especially with TB. If you look at TB, multiple doses of antibiotics are given over a 6-month period. So that's a lot of doses of antibiotics that actually could be saved with the new TB vaccine.
And the WHO assesses there's a high likelihood of 2 TB vaccines succeeding.
That's right.
One to prevent infection in children, one to prevent latent TB turning into active infection.
Absolutely.
In teenagers and adults.
Yeah.
Astonishing. The other thing that struck me is, as a very hopeful sign, is that I think the WHO assessment, if I understood it, was that 44 vaccines were likely enough to succeed to be worth including in the analysis.
That's right, against 24 pathogens.
So potentially, if we can get our act together and use them properly, which is a big if,
yeah,
vaccines can make an enormous difference against AMR.
Absolutely. When we're talking about the pathogens, there is a big divide. So the WHO really concentrates on low and middle income countries, whereas some of the panelists were actually from the UK and the EMA. And they were looking at these infections, bacterial infections that are becoming antibiotic resistant. So if they can create new vaccines for these, especially sexually transmitted diseases. What was I saying?
Especially sexually transmitted diseases. If they can create new vaccines. Industrialized countries.
So, yeah, the WHO traditionally looks at low and middle income countries, but some of the panelists were actually from the EMA in Europe and the UK, and they are looking for vaccines for bacterial infections, especially sexually transmitted diseases that are becoming antibiotic resistant. So they have a whole other, the WHO didn't cover in their report, there's a whole other section of vaccines that they're desperate for people to fund the development of.
And there are mechanisms for doing that, right? I mean, we know about the US mechanism, which gives companies
a voucher. Yeah.
fast track
I heard about that today. That's something It's been a day of new terminology for me, and vouchers was something I needed to go away and research. I mean, what are vouchers?
Well, vouchers pretty simply are a way to incentivize companies to develop treatments for orphan diseases, for diseases which aren't common in the United States, potentially could be common in the rest of the world, and that then gives them a voucher they can use for fast-track review of of any future medicine. And so it's an interesting
incentive. Yeah,
it's a very powerful incentive. I mean, the frustrating bit of today, to be honest, is that the first session of the day featured people whose interest is in taking away any incentives for R&D based pharmaceutical companies to develop new vaccines, because they say we should get rid of intellectual property, we should force them to license away the technology as soon as it's developed. And to me, as long as that attitude persists, as long as we don't look for constructive public-private partnerships, we're going to slow down this important work.
Right.
Tomorrow, Chris, we have another day, and we'll be doing another report for Medical Life audiences around the world. If there's something you'd like us to cover, let us know, send us a message, and we'll do our best.
Please come back. We'll see you tomorrow.